Welcome to another podcast with two fun guys talking food plots, where we share ideas and methods to growing more attractive food plots with less work. My name is Randy VanderVeen of Strategic Habitat, and my co-host is Brad Harper of Harper Growing Solutions, featuring the Plot Dr. line of liquid lime and liquid fertilizers. In this episode, Brad and I talk about how early you can lime and fertilize your food plots, how late you can frost seed switchgrass and clover, different herbicide options if you didn't want to use Roundup, and we finish up with the best time to work on your hinge cutting projects for this year. So with that said, let's go right into the call with Brad. So how you doing today, Brad?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Real good. So, hey, our first podcast for 2022. Things are just barely starting to turn green. You're probably seeing some deer concentrating out in some of them fields, getting some of that new growth out there these days, hey?
Yeah, it's definitely been picking up the last week. We're actually getting snow right now, but we had just lost our snow. And like you say, it's like as soon as that's gone, that little bit of green up just makes them go nuts.
Yeah. I was hinge cutting pretty much all day along a food plot and just making some beds and whatnot. And there was a few deer out in the food plot pretty much 70, 80 yards away, and they didn't even mind, they just kind of kept an eye on us. But yeah, they were so hard up for that rye that was coming up that they pretty much spent all day in that food plot. It's pretty funny.
That's awesome.
Kind of wet out in the woods. I think the frost isn't totally gone yet, and boy, some of these woodlots got a lot of standing water in it, so it doesn't look like our green up is going to be ahead of schedule this year at all.
No, and it's definitely very wet here. We got just puddles all over the place. Everything's saturated, kind of a mess right now. But like you say, that's kind of nice with the temperatures and the frost kind of still in the ground, able to extend the habitat season a little bit, give some guys some more time to do some more projects.
Yeah. And get that postseason scouting done before green up is always a good thing. So speaking of frost in the ground, are you getting quite a few questions from guys about how late they can frost seed?
Yeah, how late they can frost seed, mainly looking at clover and chicory there. And I think that's something like, especially up by me, we have plenty of time yet, just looking at the forecast. I mean, we stay getting down below freezing for another, I think it's at least 10 days. And it's like, as long as it's getting below freezing, that freeze thaw is going to be what actually helps you out there. So we still got plenty of time. I don't know what it looks like, maybe down southern Michigan or anywhere south of that yet, but up by me, we still got some time.
Yeah, I think here in the Grand Rapids area, we're not even scheduled to get above 60 degrees for the next 10 days. And, some of these nights are going to be below freezing. So it doesn't bother me. I kind of hate to see some of these fruit trees, start to blossom out, and then you get a hard freeze and, there goes your apple crop for the fall. So are they also asking you if they can frost seed if they haven't done any prep work on that ground previous fall?
Yeah. And I think that, especially with how popular switch is, just a lot of guys possibly trying to either rush it or maybe not too familiar with that whole process. And, whether you did maybe one Roundup kill, or if you had a crop planted in there last fall and now you want to, frost seed some switch into it. And I think that's kind of touchy just because of, how finicky switch is and or the patience game with switch. And I think that definitely helps having a lot cleaner seed bed. But one other thing that we can do is, if guys might not be able to frost seed because of lack of preparation, or maybe they want to make sure they got a good enough kill, we can always still put down our simazine and get one more Roundup app, because on the ag side, we do a lot of drilling of switch, end of May, early June. So that's something that I think if you don't have your bed prepared, I'd rather be safe than sorry and try to get that simazine out and try to get one more good Roundup kill in May, and then possibly plant that in June rather than just try to rush it and just frost seed it just because.
Yeah, exactly. And guys are, I hear guys asking me if the soil temperature needs to be at a certain level in order to plant switchgrass. And It's not like sorghum. Sorghum, I believe you got to have like a 60-degree soil temperature, whereas in switch, it's not that way. I mean, shoot, you're frost seeding switchgrass, which you wouldn't want to do that with sorghum.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah,
know?
I think as long as if you have a good seed bed prepared, obviously go for it, and there's still plenty of time for that. But if there's any questions or you have any doubts, I think that that's something I'd rather be safe than sorry. I mean, switch is not extremely cheap. It's not getting crazy too bad yet, but I think that's something that I'd rather be safe than sorry. And even if that means, maybe run some soybeans there this year just to make sure we got a good kill before we go and plant that switch. But there's also a couple things that we can do too, that if guys without question just wanted to get it in the ground, quinclorac is something that we can take a look at as far as right after emergence of the switch. We can spray that to help with some weeds. So there's definitely options for both ways, however you want to go. But I still like trying to make sure I do as much of my homework beforehand as possible.
Yeah, that quinclorac really works well on that foxtail.
Exactly. And I like it just because that's too, you can get in right away and spray that. And you can do, 2 or 3 applications of that the first year before you have to worry about getting in there with 2,4-D or anything else that, you can get right on it with that. So that is a very good option.
Yeah. And I think with 2,4-D, you've got to wait till you get at least 4 or 5 leaves coming off that stem, a switch, before you can start putting 2,4-D on there. So yeah, you're right. You can do that right away with quinclorac. So speaking of herbicide, what kind of options are you looking at this year? I mean, boy, I think everybody knows what the price of glyphosate has gone to this spring. Do you have any other ideas that guys might use instead of something like Roundup?
Yeah, I know there's been a lot of guys asking if there's anywhere that they might be able to buy less than a 2.5 gallon. I know on the ag side right now, we're looking at, I think the cheapest I could even get it for is $75 a gallon right now. So I know I've been seeing on Facebook, there's a lot of guys finding them deals from, old stock, which is awesome. Might as well stock up if you see the prices low. But yeah, looking at the different options for herbicide, especially obviously with the increase, I know most of them have gone up, but not all of them quite went up like Roundup did. So we still have 2,4-D that didn't really go up too bad. Butyrec didn't go up too bad. There is a little bit of a shortage of clethodim, but it's not terrible and nothing to be worried about yet. But looking at different options, I know looking at possibly a few more mowings just to see if we can help out with some of them harder to kill weeds. But Rely is an option. That's glufosinate. That's basically Roundup's cousin, to where that basically kills almost everything. Grasses and broadleaf. So that's a good option if you can find it or have access to that. But I know that the crimper is definitely going to be pulling a little more weight now, being able to just go and try to time that to where we can get away from herbicide possibly, or at least take care of a lot of weeds by crimping. So I know that a lot of guys have been looking at those a little more seriously than before.
Yeah, exactly. And, crimping being with no-till, I mean, me and you are big on no-till, and if worse comes to worse and guys absolutely don't want to buy Roundup, or maybe they don't want to use it, period, no matter what the cost, another option is just to keep tilling the plot. You can till it 2 to 3 times and just keep turning that dirt over. And after the second or third time you go in there and till or disc it, those weeds are pretty much going to be eliminated, and then you can go ahead and plant. And at that point, sometimes you can plant oats with whatever you're planting, and that'll help to get some growth right out of the ground right away and help to suppress weeds. But it kind of goes against our no-till process. But hey, it's better than having a weed infestation if you don't want to use Roundup.
Yeah, and I think that's something that it's kind of late, but at the same time, we couldn't really see this coming. But this spring, I'll be doing a few trials, kind of looking at some other options and trying to see what I can do without putting any herbicide on, looking at the crimper method, and just at least have a few different trials going just to see, what we can do any issues that come up and other ways we could possibly get around that. So I'm going to play with that this spring a lot, just because I don't think the Roundup price is going to be going away anytime soon.
So yeah, you're talking about the crimper, and a lot of guys are going to be planting buckwheat this summer. And so, if you didn't want to go the Roundup route, after you crimp the buckwheat, just in case the buckwheat doesn't come up as well, or you don't get as good a growth out of that buckwheat as what you had hoped, I always recommend going with the multi-species instead of just the monoculture of buckwheat. Planting oats and rye, I think, is a big help to that buckwheat. I mean, you're gonna be producing more green manure. You're going to be suppressing weeds a little bit better, feeding that soil a little bit faster. And if you're going to use a crimper anyway, it's just a no-brainer to plant oats and rye with that buckwheat.
Yeah, and that's something that, especially looking at John's Soil Builder, I mean, if you're growing that many crops together, that's going to help suppress those weeds. And with a crimper, that's not an issue. So obviously looking at soil health and weed suppression, just by putting a few different crops together, that's only going to help. And I think too, that almost comes back to really making sure that you're adding rye, because anywhere you got rye coming up, that gets pretty thick and pretty tall. And it might not be the best weed suppression, but at least that's going to be better than nothing. So just starting out with that winter rye and being able to crimp that with your summer crop going in, that's going to help as well. So maybe for guys that haven't done the 3-crop rotation before, it might be something to think about.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I was getting a bunch of questions about when to lime and fertilize, as well as when to start spraying herbicides. And I think for the most part, both of those answers are the same, that we kind of want to wait till everything's growing. As far as fertilizer goes, we want to wait till that soil's at least 53 degrees. That's really when the biology wakes up and starts getting everything going, just to be as efficient as possible with whatever we're putting down. Mm-hmm. Now, if you're using conventional lime, there's not ever really a bad time to do that, but a lot of guys mainly were asking about the liquid. And that's something that's the same as the fertilizer. I like to wait till we're, basically planting or at least growing on a perennial plot, that we still have plenty of time. I'm looking at, middle of May at the earliest to start putting that stuff down. And same goes for herbicide. We want to make sure for our post-emergent like Roundup or Butarac or 2,4-D, we want to make sure that stuff's growing and, not just barely waking up. I mean, right now we're putting simazine down, the pre-emergent herbicides. That's right now is the perfect time for those. But anything post-emergent, definitely wait till everything's, up and growing, just to be as efficient as possible.
Yeah. And those dates that you threw out there, that was pretty much for, central Michigan. And obviously, the further south you go, the little bit earlier that's going to be. So, yeah.
Correct.
So then you got poor guys like John up there in UP, he's even later than that yet. So
I think he's still covered up in snow.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you take the good with the bad in the beautiful country of the UP.
That's right.
I saw you had made a post about red osier dogwood. Have you had a lot of guys question you about that? Is that something that you're carrying or what?
Yeah. So I always try to do a few cuttings and whips and make sure at least my nursery's stocked every year. And a lot of guys that come to get seed and fertilizer from me always ask what all we have. So as I was taking the cuttings and whips, I think that was last week, I had a ton of questions. And I think that's something that most guys have at least, one wet spot on their piece for the most part, that we can do whips and or do some cuttings and just help with browse. But that's something that it's super simple, that all you got to do is, if you can find some, just go, basically prune some branches off of it and stick them in the ground. The success rate when you're doing whips isn't the best, but that's an easy way that, kind of quantity over quality method, that just go stick a bunch in the ground. As long as that's wet for most of the year, you're able to, propagate your own. And that's something that there was a lot of questions, and I don't know if maybe we need to do a video on that to go a little more in detail, but that's something I had a lot of questions on how to do that, kind of when, where, all those questions. And as long as it's wet, I would say at least probably 50% of the year, especially when you're trying to do the whips, just because that doesn't have roots to begin with. So it's kind of iffy when you're doing that. If it does get dry, they can stand a little drier ground if you're planting it with a root system. But when you're doing whips, I mean, that's not a big issue at all, just to throw a bunch of branches in the ground and kind of see what takes.
Yeah. Yeah. You're saying branches on the ground. That's, that's what I always recommend. If guys want to put in some red osier dogwood, man, if you've got any trees sitting around, like, maples or, whatever kind of trees you got that you can hinge, and just put that head on the ground and then just stick those red osier dogwoods right inside those heads so that the deer can't get at them, because, man, those red osier dogwood seedlings are like deer candy, and
Absolutely. Yeah, I like that.
yeah, those treetops are a great way to just protect those things. And you think your deer repellent would help on that, Brad, if you were to spray those red osier dogwood seedlings with that?
Yeah, absolutely, that would. And I really like that with the hinge cuts, because there's a lot of guys that are dropping trees in the winter, just to get some buds on the ground as they're doing their habitat projects. And I kind of like to do that with my oaks. That I'll go plant white oaks in those treetops too, after the deer kind of demolish all the buds they can reach. But that's something that if you were to go spray that, not only even if you're planting oaks, kind of regardless, whatever you're planting, but the red osiers, but especially if you have a treetop or branches that you're kind of piling around that to kind of save that seedling, if you were to spray all of that with the deer detour, that would definitely give you a whole lot more help than just kind of going and sticking them all over the place. That would be really beneficial.
Yeah, not only red osier dogwood, you could do that too, but say hybrid willows or streamco willows, that type of thing. That's another deer candy item that's kind of hard to grow for some guys if they don't have a lot of protection and they got a high deer population. It's almost a waste of time,
Yeah,
but
no, that would work really well.
So, how you doing on Miscanthus this year? Are you increasing your numbers, or I mean, what can guys expect if they wanted to pick up some Miscanthus from you?
Basically, same as usual. We're on track. We're gonna take a little more out of the ground than we did last year, but everything should be the same. Prices are exactly the same actually as last year. We did not go up on that, so that's kind of nice. I'm shooting for to have right around 10,000 or so.
Oh, wow.
So we should have plenty. I think last year we did about 8.5, between right around there. So we're doing a little bit more, but yeah, there won't be any issues, and price did not go up.
Now your Miscanthus, Brad, I mean, that's not just rhizomes. I mean, you actually have them coming out of the ground already in pots. Is that correct?
Yeah. And those are sold out right now.
Oh, okay. All right. So, but
I just had a guy 2 weeks ago come in and clean me out.
Oh, okay. Wow. And so now, do you have rhizomes available?
I will here probably in about 3 weeks, is what I'm guessing, that we'll have the rhizomes. I know I have a couple pots left, but it's not really worth anything talking about. But then again, this fall and next spring, we will have, we'll be doing a lot more pots, just because it seems that when guys are sandy, we just have so much more success when we plant a pot in the fall for sure. But that way you're just planting that with an already established root system, that guys had way better luck with that. So rather than, maybe trying to knock the whole project out at once, they were kind of breaking that in 2 or 3 and just doing it with pots. That way they were able to at least have some success, and it's been working really, really well.
Okay. And then you've got cedars and spruce trees and stuff. Are you doing that again?
Yep, doing a lot more this year. Had a lot of interest in the firs and the spruce, all the pines, all the fruit trees. That really went over. I think guys really like being able to just kind of make a one stop and get everything they needed. So we're definitely doing that again.
Right.
One question though I have been getting a lot, and this is for you, was talking about how late they can go into the spring with like hinge cutting and just dropping trees, especially when they're, wanting those trees to throw some stump sprouts and just kind of wondering how late they can really go about that. And that's something I'd rather have you answer.
Yeah, I've been getting quite a few of them questions as well. And I guess my first reaction as far as hinge cutting goes is, the best time to hinge cut is when you got time to hinge cut, really regardless of the time of year. So it's not really weather dependent, except for the fact that I really don't care to hinge cut when it's very, very cold, say in single digits or lower teens. You get some species of trees where they're just going to snap off, no matter how big or small. It takes a little bit more, I guess you might want to say, foresight, know-how to see how that tree is going to fall. If you can make that tree slow down by hitting other trees, and keep that head from hitting the ground real hard, you're going to have more success. But obviously, I think, this time of year is a great time to go out and hinge cut. Anytime it's in the, getting close to freezing or above, it's a great time. Even summertime, when it's 70, 80, 90 degrees, you can go out and hinge cut. But, obviously at that point, it's, you're dealing with heat and humidity and bugs, and, the leaves are all up, and, you can't really see very well. You can't really see what you're doing as well as you can when, we're in the dormant season like now. So again, when I visit properties, I do see a lot of attempts at hinge cutting, and guys are going out there and they're trying to get it done. Right. I mean, my hat off to them, and, they're really out there busting their butt, and some guys are putting out some great hinge cuts. Although I think if there's one issue that I see that's probably the most common as far as hinge cutting goes, and that is when guys are hinge cutting for the first time, they're pretty reluctant to take down the big trees, and I get it. Can be kind of intimidating to take down a big tree. And not only that, most guys don't know right out of the gate, is this a good tree to hinge cut or not? Am I going to screw things up? So, they tend to stick with the smaller trees coming out of the gate. And then what happens is those smaller trees, when they're laying horizontal, they tend to not live as long and die because they're being shaded out by the big trees that should have come down first. So I just want to encourage guys, if you are going to go out there and do some hinge cutting this spring or summer, don't be afraid to take down some big trees. And I'm talking, 12-inch, 16-inch trees. So really, I mean, the main goal of hinge cutting as well is you want to take out that canopy and bring down some sunlight to the forest floor. So that's going to give you some regeneration. That's going to be translated into food and cover. You're going to knock down the sight lines in your woods so you can't see 300 yards through the woods. And, if you can do several pockets of those where it makes sense, it's just, it works basically every time it's tried. Guys with those big wide open woods, man, you go in there and you do some big hinge cut operations, and they're just floored as to the number of deer that end up, living in them hinge cuts and running into those hinge cuts whenever they get bumped. So it's a great way to go to make some instant food and cover. And, the guys that say that hinge cutting don't work, I'd love to see, what kind of hinge cuts they're referring to, whether they did them or somebody else did it for them. There is a right way and a wrong way to do it. And Jake and I, we love working together out there. And man, when we get down to the hinge cut bedding area, it's like, we're very excited for the landowner because we know how well it's going to work.
No, I just to kind of finish that off. When I walked Jake's and he's out there hinging a hinge off of a hinge off of a hinge, I mean, that is so cool. And just to see how those end up turning out, and to see all them deer using that and just beds all over, that's just awesome stuff. But I think too, I guess, how late would you say that you'd be comfortable cutting some stuff that you're wanting stump sprouts to pop up? I mean, do we still have time for that, do you think?
Oh yeah. And there's really not a time where it's too late, because if you don't get the stump to sprout this year, let's say you're doing it in August or something like that, you're not going to get much growth yet this year. So, you're going to get the growth in the next year. So, you don't necessarily have to wait until the dormant season to get that growth. You just might be delayed a year or so. So not a big deal.
Okay, good. Yeah, I got that a lot. Just basically guys knowing that we're finally going to be doing some podcasts again because it's the season, and that was probably one of my biggest questions, was that I think a lot of guys are really wanting to put the chainsaw to use, because that is probably one of the biggest tools that we have, and it's still kind of, new to a lot of guys. So that's good information there.
Yep. My schedule starts to lighten up a little bit toward the end of May, June, and July. And so, if guys hearing this, if they're thinking about having some hinge cutting done, I'll probably have some dates available that I can fit you in, say May, June, and July, and pretty much, run the whole Midwest. So pretty good chance I'll probably be in your neck of the woods at some point here in the next few months,
Yeah, that's awesome.
All right, Brad. Well, hey, we'll catch up again with you later on another podcast here later this month. And I'm sure a lot of guys are going to be putting seed in the ground. So we'll hit up another one at that time.
Yeah, no, that sounds like a game plan. I appreciate it.
All right. Talk to you later, Brad.
All right, have a good one. We'll see you.
See ya.